The morning sun filtered through the airplane window as Margaret Jensen clutched her daughter's hand, watching the New York skyline emerge through scattered clouds. After months of planning, saving every spare dollar from their modest life in Springfield, Illinois, this trip represented more than just a vacation. It was a promise fulfilled. A promise she'd made to her 15-year-old daughter Emma 3 years ago, when times were harder and dreams seemed impossibly distant. "Look, honey," Margaret whispered, pointing toward the gleaming towers of Manhattan. "There it is. The city that never sleeps." Emma's eyes sparkled with the kind of wonder that only comes from seeing childhood dreams materialize. Her auburn hair caught the light as she pressed her face against the small window, her breath fogging the glass. "It's even bigger than I imagined, Mom. Are you sure we can afford all this?" Robert Jensen, Margaret's husband of 18 years, reached across the aisle from his seat and squeezed his wife's shoulder. His weathered hands, marked by years of factory work, trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the overwhelming joy of finally being able to give his family something extraordinary. "We saved for this, Emma. Every overtime shift, every skipped dinner out. This is our time." The descent into JFK International Airport felt surreal. Margaret found herself thinking about how different this moment was from the struggles they'd faced just 2 years earlier, when Robert had been laid off and they'd nearly lost their small ranch house. The memory of Emma quietly giving up her plans for summer camp, never complaining, still brought tears to Margaret's eyes. This trip was their way of making up for those lost opportunities, those stolen moments of childhood joy. As they collected their modest luggage from the carousel, Emma bounced on her toes with excitement. "Can we really see Times Square tonight? And tomorrow, the Statue of Liberty?" Her voice carried that pure, uninhibited enthusiasm that Margaret feared would disappear as her daughter grew older. At 15, Emma still possessed that magical balance between childhood wonder and emerging maturity that made Margaret's heart both swell with pride and ache with the knowledge that these moments were finite. The taxi ride through Queens provided their first real glimpse of New York life, the diverse neighborhoods, the bustling streets, the energy that seemed to pulse through every corner. Margaret had spent weeks researching accommodations, finally settling on a well-reviewed Airbnb that fit their tight budget while still promising comfort and safety. The listing showed a cozy ground-floor apartment attached to a larger residence, with glowing reviews praising the host's attentiveness and the property's convenient location. When they arrived at 42 to 17 Maple Street, the reality matched the photos perfectly. The tree-lined street felt peaceful, almost suburban, a welcome contrast to the urban intensity they'd expected. The apartment entrance was separate from the main house, providing privacy while still feeling secure. Margaret felt a wave of relief wash over her. She'd made the right choice. Their host, David Chen, emerged from the main house as they unloaded their bags. A man in his early 40s with an easy smile and helpful demeanor, he immediately put them at ease. "Welcome to New York," he said warmly, helping Robert with the heavier suitcase. "I hope you had a smooth flight. I've left some local restaurant recommendations on the kitchen counter, and there's a subway map with the best routes to all the major attractions." Emma was already exploring the apartment's interior, calling out observations about the modern amenities and comfortable furnishings. "Mom, there's even a little balcony overlooking the garden." Her voice echoed with delight from what would be her bedroom, a charming space with floral wallpaper and a window that faced the quiet backyard. David noticed Margaret's careful inspection of the security features, the sturdy locks, the ground floor, windows, the proximity to the main house. "I completely understand your caution," he said softly, recognizing the protective instincts of a mother in an unfamiliar place. "I work nights mostly, I drive for one of the ride-sharing services, but I'm always reachable if you need anything. The neighborhood is very safe, and Mrs. Rodriguez next door is wonderful. She's raised 6 children and has been here for 20 years. That first evening unfolded like a postcard memory. They walked to a local Italian restaurant where Emma tried her first authentic New York pizza, declaring it life-changing, with the dramatic flair only teenagers can muster. Robert kept taking photos with his old digital camera, wanting to capture every moment, every smile. Margaret felt a deep satisfaction watching her family experience joy without the underlying worry about money that had shadowed their lives for so long. Back at the apartment, they spread out their tourist maps on the small dining table, planning their itinerary with the excited energy of children on Christmas morning. Emma had made a list of must-see locations, complete with estimated travel times and ticket prices. Her organizational skills amazed Margaret. When had her little girl become so thoughtful and mature? The first 2 days passed in a blur of tourist activities and family bonding. They took the subway into Manhattan, where Emma's eyes grew wide at the towering skyscrapers and endless streams of people. In Central Park, they rented bikes and rode along the paths, Margaret laughing as Robert struggled to keep up with Emma's energetic pace. They visited the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where Emma stood transfixed before the Egyptian artifacts, and took the ferry to the Statue of Liberty, where all 3 of them felt the emotional weight of standing before such an iconic symbol of hope and freedom. Each evening, they returned to their Queens apartment, tired but exhilarated, sharing stories about their day and planning the next adventure. Emma would curl up in her room, writing in the journal she'd brought specifically for this trip, documenting every detail so she could relive these memories forever. Margaret would watch her daughter through the partially open door, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude that they'd been able to give Emma this experience. "She's growing up so fast," Margaret whispered to Robert on their second night, as they listened to Emma video calling her best friend Sarah back home, excitedly describing everything she'd seen. "She is," Robert agreed, wrapping his arms around his wife. "But look at her. She's happy, really happy. When's the last time you saw her smile this much?" It was true. The past year had been challenging for Emma in ways that went beyond their financial struggles. High school social dynamics, academic pressure, and the general uncertainty that seemed to define teenage life had created a quiet sadness in their daughter that Margaret had noticed but hadn't known how to address. This trip was bringing back the vibrant, confident girl they remembered from her younger years. Their third day brought new adventures. A Broadway matinee that left Emma starstruck, followed by an afternoon in Greenwich Village where they discovered small bookshops and cafes that felt worlds away from their small Illinois town. Emma bought postcards to send to her friends and a small snow globe for her bedroom back home. Every purchase felt significant, a tangible piece of this magical experience to take with them. That evening, they decided to explore the neighborhood around their Airbnb, walking to a nearby diner that David had recommended. The owner, a kindly Greek man named Stavros, fussed over Emma like she was his own granddaughter, bringing her extra dessert and telling stories about the neighborhood's history. It was exactly the kind of authentic New York experience Margaret had hoped for. Warm, genuine connections that made the city feel less intimidating and more like a place where real people lived real lives. As they walked back to the apartment, under the soft glow of streetlights, Emma skipped ahead, her camera phone capturing the charming residential street. "I don't want this to end," she called back to her parents. "Can we come back next year?" Margaret and Robert exchanged glances. Next year would bring Emma's junior year of high school, college preparation expenses, and all the financial realities that would make another trip like this unlikely. But tonight, surrounded by the gentle evening air and their daughter's pure happiness, those worries felt distant and manageable. "We'll see, sweetheart," Margaret replied, meaning it more than Emma could know. Somehow, they would find a way to create more moments like these, more opportunities for their family to experience joy together. Back at the apartment, Emma settled into her evening routine with the comfortable familiarity that had developed. Over their few days in New York, she organized the day's photos on her phone, added entries to her travel journal, and arranged her small collection of souvenirs on the dresser in her room. Through the thin walls, Margaret could hear her daughter humming softly, a habit from childhood that always signaled contentment. "She seems so at peace here," Margaret observed to Robert as they prepared for bed. "Different from how she's been at home lately." Robert nodded, understanding the subtle changes they'd both noticed in Emma over recent months. The quiet, withdrawn moods, the occasional tears that she tried to hide, the sense that she was carrying burdens too heavy for 15-year-old shoulders. Maybe she just needed this. Time away from everything, time to remember who she is when she's not worried about fitting in or measuring up. As Margaret drifted off to sleep that third night, she felt a deep sense of gratitude and contentment. The trip was exceeding all their expectations, bringing their family closer together and giving Emma memories that would last a lifetime. The morning would bring their planned visit to the Empire State Building, and Emma was already excited about the photos she would take from the observation deck. But sometime in the darkness of that third night, between the hours when peaceful families sleep and morning light returns, something shifted in their small sanctuary. The careful plans, the loving intentions, the promise of tomorrow's adventures, all of it would be shattered by a silence that would echo far beyond that queen's apartment, reaching into the deepest fears of every parent who has ever sent a child to sleep with a goodnight kiss, believing that love alone could keep them safe. The fourth morning dawned bright and clear, with the kind of crisp spring air that makes New York feel like a city of infinite possibilities. Margaret woke early, as she often did, planning to surprise Emma and Robert with breakfast from the bakery they'd discovered down the street. She moved quietly through the apartment, careful not to wake her family, already imagining Emma's delight at fresh bagels and the special cream cheese that had become her new obsession. But as she passed Emma's room, something felt wrong. The silence was too complete, too still. The door was closed, which wasn't unusual, but there was an absence of sound that struck Margaret as odd. No soft breathing, no rustling of sheets, no small movements that indicated peaceful sleep. At first, she told herself she was being overly protective, that Emma was simply sleeping deeply after their busy day. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. Finally, unable to shake her maternal instincts, Margaret knocked softly on the door. "Emma, honey, are you awake?" Silence. She knocked again, a little louder. "Emma? I'm thinking of getting those bagels you liked for breakfast." Still nothing. Margaret's heart began to race as she turned the handle and slowly opened the door. The room was filled with morning light streaming through the window, illuminating a scene that would be burned into her memory forever. The bed was neatly made, as if it hadn't been slept in. Emma's phone sat on the small desk, surrounded by her travel journal, postcards, and the small treasures she'd collected over their 3 days in the city. But Emma was gone. "Robert!" Margaret's voice cracked as she called for her husband, the word escaping as both a shout and a sob. "Robert, come here, now!" The sound of running footsteps echoed through the apartment as Robert rushed to his wife's side. Together, they stood in the doorway of their daughter's room, trying to process what they were seeing, or rather what they weren't seeing. "Maybe she went for a walk," Robert said, his voice hollow and uncertain. "You know how she likes to explore." But even as he spoke the words, they both knew something was terribly wrong. Emma would never leave without telling them. would never go out alone in an unfamiliar city, would never leave her phone behind. These were not the actions of their careful, responsible daughter. Margaret moved into the room, searching for any clue that might explain Emma's absence. Her clothes were still neatly folded in her small suitcase. Her favorite jacket hung in the closet. Even her sneakers were arranged by the door exactly as she'd left them the night before. The window was slightly open, just a few inches, letting in the fresh morning air. Margaret distinctly remembered Emma closing it before bed, complaining about the neighbor's cat that liked to prowl the garden at night. Had someone opened it from the outside? Or had Emma opened it herself for some reason? "We need to call the police," Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper. The words felt surreal, impossible. Things like this didn't happen to families like theirs, didn't happen to careful parents who researched every decision and tried to make all the right choices. Robert was already reaching for his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed 911. As he spoke to the dispatcher, Margaret continued searching the room for any sign of what might have happened to their daughter. That's when she noticed Emma's phone lighting up with a notification. With trembling fingers, Margaret picked up the device. Emma had given her the passcode months ago, part of their family agreement about digital safety and trust. The screen showed a new audio recording in Emma's voice memo app, a recording that had been created at 3:17 a.m. Margaret's blood went cold as she saw the timestamp. She pressed play with a finger that felt disconnected from her body, as if she were watching someone else make this terrible discovery. For nearly 11 seconds, she listened to sounds that would haunt her forever. Slow, deliberate footsteps on what sounded like wooden floors, heavy breathing, labored and frightening. And then, in the final moments of the recording, a man's voice, rough, unfamiliar, terrifying, whispering Emma's name over and over again. The phone slipped from Margaret's grasp, clattering to the floor as she collapsed into the chair beside Emma's desk. The sound seemed to echo through the apartment, through her consciousness, through every assumption she'd ever held about safety and protection and the power of a mother's love to shield her child from harm. This was the moment when their vacation ended and their nightmare began, a nightmare that would test every bond of love and faith that held their family together, and challenge everything they thought they knew about the world and their place in it. The next few hours passed in a haze of uniforms, questions, and procedural chaos that felt both urgent and helplessly slow. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived. Within 30 minutes of Robert's 911 call, a seasoned investigator with kind eyes who immediately understood the gravity of what they were facing. Behind her came crime scene technicians, photographers, and a victim services coordinator whose gentle manner couldn't disguise the grim reality of her presence. Margaret found herself sitting in the small living room of their Airbnb, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped around her shoulders, watching strangers transform their temporary home into an active investigation site. Everything felt surreal, like watching a television crime drama where she'd accidentally been cast in the starring role. But the terror in her chest was too real, too consuming, to be anything but devastating reality. "Mrs. Jensen, I need you to walk me through everything from yesterday evening," Detective Martinez said, settling into the chair across from Margaret, with a notepad and an expression of professional compassion. "Every detail you can remember, no matter how small it might seem." Margaret's mind felt fragmented, struggling to organize the simple sequence of events that had led to this incomprehensible moment. "We had dinner at Stavros's place, the Greek diner about 6 blocks from here. Emma loved it there. She was so happy." Her voice broke on the last word, the past tense feeling like a betrayal of hope. "What time did you return to the apartment?" "Around 8:30. Emma wanted to organize her photos and write in her journal. She does that every night." That every night, Margaret caught herself using past tense again and felt sick. She's very organized, very responsible. She would never just leave without telling us. Detective Martinez nodded, making notes. Tell me about your interactions with the host, David Chen. How did he seem when you met him? Robert, who had been pacing near the window, turned to join the conversation. He seemed perfectly normal, helpful, friendly. He gave us restaurant recommendations, showed us how the apartment systems worked. Nothing seemed off about him at all. And you said he mentioned working nights? Yes, he drives for a ride-sharing service. Said he's usually out from around 10 p.m. until early morning. Margaret's mind was starting to function more clearly, focusing on details that might matter. He lives in the main house, just through that door there, but we haven't heard from him since yesterday evening. As if summoned by their conversation, a knock came at the apartment door. Through the window, Margaret could see David Chen standing on the small porch, his face pale and concerned. Detective Martinez went to speak with him, and through the thin walls, Margaret could hear fragments of their conversation. I was working last night. Came home around 7 this morning. No idea anything was wrong until I saw all the police cars. Margaret strained to hear more, searching David's voice for any hint of deception or guilt. But he sounded genuinely shocked and concerned, asking repeatedly if there was anything he could do to help. Still, she couldn't shake the memory of that terrifying voice on Emma's phone, whispering her daughter's name in the darkness. While Detective Martinez interviewed David outside, crime scene technicians worked methodically through Emma's room. They dusted for fingerprints, photographed every surface, and carefully bagged potential evidence, including Emma's phone with its horrifying audio recording. Margaret watched them handle her daughter's belongings with clinical efficiency. Each item transformed from a cherished memory into potential evidence in an investigation she still couldn't fully accept was real. Ma'am, a young officer approached Margaret with Emma's travel journal in his hands. We found this on the desk. There might be something relevant in her recent entries. Margaret took the journal with trembling hands. Emma's neat handwriting filled the pages, documenting every detail of their trip with the enthusiasm and precision that characterized everything her daughter did. The first few entries radiated joy and excitement. Finally in New York. Mom looked so happy when she saw the apartment. I think this trip is exactly what our family needed. But as Margaret read further, she noticed subtle changes in Emma's tone. Someone was walking around outside my window last night. Probably just the neighbor's cat, but it was weird. The footsteps sounded too heavy. And then, from the entry dated just yesterday, I keep feeling like someone is watching us, probably just being paranoid, but something feels different about this place at night. Don't want to worry Mom and Dad, though. They've worked so hard to make this trip happen. The journal slipped from Margaret's hands as she realized her daughter had been feeling unsafe and had chosen to protect her parents rather than voice her concerns. The guilt hit her like a physical blow. How had she missed the signs? How had her maternal instincts failed to detect her child's growing unease? Mrs. Jensen, Detective Martinez had returned from her conversation with David Chen. Mr. Chen has agreed to provide his ride-sharing app data and GPS records for last night. Initially, everything appears to corroborate his story, but we're going to verify his alibi thoroughly. What did you think of him? Robert asked bluntly. Your gut feeling. Is he involved in this? Detective Martinez chose her words carefully. He seems genuinely surprised and concerned, but in cases like this, we investigate everyone who had access to your daughter. That includes the host, neighbors, and anyone else who might have known about your family's presence here. As the morning progressed, more disturbing details emerged. The building security camera, which David had mentioned was positioned in the backyard for property protection, had mysteriously malfunctioned between 2:48 a.m. and 4:12 a.m., almost exactly the time frame when the audio recording was created. The camera company confirmed that the system required manual intervention to create such a gap, suggesting deliberate tampering rather than technical failure. Neighbors began coming forward with information that painted a more complex picture of the property and its recent history. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman next door whom David had mentioned, revealed that there had been complaints from previous guests about strange noises and uncomfortable incidents. A couple from Boston, maybe 3 months ago, Mrs. Rodriguez told Detective Martinez in Margaret's presence. The woman came to my door one morning, asking if I'd seen anyone walking around the property at night. She said she kept waking up feeling like someone was watching her through the window. Margaret felt ice forming in her stomach. Did she report it to the police? No, Misha. She said when she mentioned it to Mr. Chen, he told her it was probably just someone walking their dog late at night. She didn't want to make trouble, especially since nothing actually happened, but she left. A day early, I remember that. More concerning testimonies emerged throughout the day. A young couple who had stayed in the apartment just 6 weeks earlier had experienced similar unsettling incidents. Soft knocking on their door in the early morning hours, shadows moving past their windows, and the constant feeling of being observed. Like the previous guests, they had mentioned their concerns to David, who had offered logical explanations and seemed genuinely concerned for their comfort. The pattern is troubling, Detective Martinez admitted to Margaret and Robert during a brief break in the investigation. Multiple guests reporting similar experiences, all dismissed as coincidence or misunderstanding. It suggests either someone has been targeting this property specifically or... She didn't finish the sentence, but Margaret understood the implication. Either a stranger had been stalking guests at this Airbnb, or David Chen's helpful, concerned demeanor masked something far more sinister. As afternoon turned to evening, Margaret found herself facing the first night without Emma in 15 years. The thought was unbearable, but what made it worse was the growing realization that their daughter had tried to protect them from her own fears, had chosen their happiness over her own sense of safety. She was trying to be strong for us, Margaret whispered to Robert as they sat in the apartment's living room, surrounded by the debris of a crime scene investigation. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't want to ruin our trip. Robert's jaw tightened with a mixture of guilt and rage. She shouldn't have had to protect us. We should have protected her. His words carried the weight of every parent's deepest fear, the possibility that their love, however fierce and genuine, might not be enough to keep their child safe from the dangers lurking in an unpredictable world. Detective Martinez had arranged for them to stay in a nearby hotel while the investigation continued, but Margaret couldn't bear the thought of leaving the last place where Emma had been safe. Even though the apartment now felt contaminated by fear and loss, it was still the closest thing to her daughter's presence that remained. I need to understand how this happened, Margaret said, her voice growing stronger as shock gave way to determination. Emma was right here, just a few feet away from us. How does someone just vanish without making any noise, without fighting, without... She couldn't finish the thought. We're going to find those answers, Detective Martinez promised. The FBI has been contacted, and we're treating this as a potential abduction. Every resource available will be focused on bringing Emma home. But as night fell over Queens and the investigation entered its second phase, Margaret faced the devastating reality that her daughter was somewhere out there, alone and afraid, while she sat helpless in the place where Emma's laughter had echoed. Just 24 hours earlier, the vacation photos on Emma's phone The half-finished journal entries, the carefully arranged souvenirs, all of it now served as evidence of dreams interrupted and innocence shattered. The night brought no rest, only the endless cycle of waiting, hoping and trying to push away the darkest possibilities that threatened to overwhelm rational thought. Margaret found herself replaying every moment of their trip, searching for signs she might have missed, warnings she should have heeded, protective actions she could have taken. But perhaps the most torturous realization was that Emma had been trying to protect her parents even as danger closed in around her. A final act of love from a daughter who understood too well the weight of her parents' sacrifices and dreams. In trying to preserve their happiness, Emma had faced her fears alone, and that knowledge would haunt Margaret through every sleepless hour of the endless night ahead. As the first day of their nightmare drew to a close, Margaret made a silent promise to her missing daughter. She would not rest, would not give up, would not let Emma's courage and sacrifice be in vain. Whatever it took, however long it took, she would bring her daughter home. The vacation was over, but the fight for Emma's life was just beginning. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, 8 million people going about their lives, unaware that in one small apartment in Queens, a family's world had collapsed into the space between a mother's goodnight kiss and the silence of an empty room. But for Margaret and Robert Jensen, New York had transformed from a place of dreams into the epicenter of their worst nightmare. A nightmare that was only beginning to reveal its true dimensions. The second day brought a new kind of torture. The media. News vans lined Maple Street by early morning, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers seeking light. Margaret watched from behind closed curtains as reporters set up their equipment, preparing to transform her family's private anguish into public consumption. 15-year-old Emma Jensen disappeared from this Queens Airbnb, she could hear. One reporter practicing her opening line. Now, disturbing questions are being raised about vacation rental safety and the screening of hosts. Margaret turned away from the window, unable to bear the reduction of Emma's disappearance to a news story angle. Her daughter wasn't a cautionary tale or a policy debate. She was a living, breathing girl who loved poetry and vintage movies, who saved her allowance to buy her father coffee on his birthday, who still asked for bedtime stories when she was feeling anxious. Detective Martinez arrived with updates that brought both hope and fresh anguish. David Chen's alibi has some significant gaps, she reported, spreading papers across the small dining table. His ride-sharing app shows he was offline between 2:50 a.m. and 4:10 a.m., which corresponds almost exactly with the time frame of the recording and the security camera malfunction. Robert leaned forward intently. So he's lying about working all night? When confronted, he claims he took a break to get something to eat, but we can't verify that story. No restaurant receipts, no security footage from nearby establishments. He says he went to an all-night diner in Manhattan, but their cameras were down for maintenance that night. The coincidences were mounting in ways that felt too convenient to be random. Margaret found herself studying the door that connected their apartment to David's main house, wondering if evil could hide behind such ordinary kindness. Had his helpful demeanor been a mask? Had he been planning something from the moment they arrived? There's something else, Detective Martinez continued, her voice growing more serious. We've been reviewing guest reviews for this property going back 2 years. While most are positive, there's a pattern of female guests, especially young women, reporting feeling uncomfortable or watched. The reviews are subtle, often buried in otherwise positive feedback, but the pattern is unmistakable. She showed them printed copies of reviews that, when read together, painted a chilling picture. Great location and host was very helpful, though I did feel a bit uneasy during my solo stay. Probably just being paranoid as a woman traveling alone. Lovely apartment, very clean. Only odd thing was feeling like someone was watching from the main house. But the host was always very professional when we interacted. Perfect for a girls' weekend, though we did hear some strange noises at night. Host explained it was the old building settling. Still had a great time. Margaret's hands trembled as she read review after review from women who had experienced the same unsettling feelings as Emma, but had dismissed their instincts as overreaction or paranoia. How many other young women had felt unsafe in this place? How many had ignored their intuition because they didn't want to appear difficult or ungrateful? "We're bringing David in for more formal questioning this afternoon," Detective Martinez said. "In the meantime, I need to prepare you for something difficult. We're going to release Emma's photo to the media and issue an Amber Alert. It's necessary for the investigation, but it means your privacy is about to become non-existent." The thought of Emma's smiling face appearing on news broadcasts and missing person websites felt like another violation, another way that their family's private joy was being twisted into public tragedy. But Margaret knew they needed every possible pair of eyes searching for her daughter. As if to underscore Detective Martinez's warning, Margaret's phone began ringing with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Reporters, distant relatives, who had seen the news, well-meaning friends from Springfield who didn't know what to say but felt compelled to call anyway. Each conversation required Margaret to relive the basic facts of Emma's disappearance, to hear the shock and sympathy in voices that reminded her this was really happening. Mrs. Jensen, a victim services coordinator named Janet, had arrived to help them navigate the media attention. "I know this feels overwhelming, but we found that families who engage strategically with the press often get better results. People see Emma's face, they remember details they might have overlooked. It could be the key to bringing her home." The press conference was scheduled for late afternoon, giving Margaret a few hours to prepare herself for the most difficult public speaking she would ever do. How do you distill a mother's love into sound bites? How do you convey the essence of a 15-year-old girl in the few minutes reporters would pay attention? But as afternoon approached, something even more disturbing occurred. Margaret's personal cell phone, a number she was certain she'd never given to anyone connected to the case, received a text message from an unknown number. "You left her alone." The words appeared on her screen like a physical slap. Margaret stared at the message, her vision blurring as panic rose in her throat. Someone was watching them, knew enough about their situation to target her specifically with psychological torture. "Robert!" she called, her voice cracking. "Look at this!" Before Robert could reach her, another message arrived. "She's still here." Detective Martinez was on the scene within minutes, bringing FBI technical specialists who immediately began working to trace the messages. But Margaret barely noticed their urgent activity. The words, "she's still here," echoed in her mind with horrifying implications. Was Emma still in the area? Was someone holding her nearby, close enough for the perpetrator to observe the family's anguish firsthand? "Mrs. Jensen, we need you to try to stay calm," said FBI agent Thomas Wright, a soft-spoken man with gray hair and the kind of steady presence that suggested he'd guided other families through similar nightmares. "These messages are likely intended to destabilize you emotionally. The sender wants you to feel helpless and guilty. Don't give them that power." But the damage was already done. The messages had awakened every self-recrimination Margaret had been trying to suppress. She had left Emma alone that night. Not intentionally, not carelessly, but the fact remained that she had been sleeping peacefully while her daughter faced unknown terror. The guilt was crushing, made worse by the knowledge that someone was deliberately exploiting her maternal anguish. The press conference proceeded despite the new developments, with Margaret standing behind a podium in the police station's briefing room, facing cameras and reporters who transformed her private grief into public spectacle. She had prepared remarks, but when the moment came to speak about Emma, preparation felt inadequate. "My daughter Emma is 15 years old," she began, her voice barely steady. "She's kind, intelligent and responsible. She loves to read, especially mystery novels, though I never imagined we'd be living in one. She wants to be a teacher someday because she believes education can change the world." Margaret's voice broke slightly. Emma was excited about this trip. We saved for months to give her this experience, to show her that dreams can come true if you work hard enough. She paused, looking directly into the cameras, imagining Emma somewhere out there, possibly watching. "Baby, if you can hear this, know that we're doing everything possible to find you. You are loved beyond measure, and we will not stop looking until you're home safe." The questions from reporters felt invasive and often irrelevant, focusing on security failures and blame rather than the urgent need to find Emma. Margaret answered what she could, deflected what she couldn't, and tried to keep Emma's humanity at the center of a story that threatened to reduce her daughter to a cautionary tale about travel safety. That evening brought a development that shifted the investigation in an unexpected direction. A guest who had stayed in David's property 8 months earlier came forward after seeing the news coverage. Maria Santos, a college student from California, had never reported her experience to police because nothing technically criminal had occurred, but her story added crucial context to the emerging pattern. "I was staying there for a long weekend with my boyfriend," Maria told Detective Martinez in Margaret's presence. "On our second night, I woke up around 3 a.m. because I heard my name being whispered outside the window. Not shouted, whispered, like someone was standing right there in the garden." Margaret's blood went cold. The parallel to Emma's recorded audio was unmistakable. "I woke up my boyfriend, but by the time we looked outside, there was no one there. He said I must have been dreaming, but I know what I heard. It was definitely my name, repeated several times in this creepy, breathy voice." "Did you mention this to David Chen?" "Yes, the next morning. He seemed really concerned and said he'd checked the security cameras, but then he told us the system had malfunctioned that night. Same excuse he apparently gave your family about the cameras being down." Agent Wright leaned forward. "Did anything else unusual happen during your stay?" "The last night, I kept my boyfriend awake because I was too scared to sleep. I felt like someone was watching us constantly, and when we were packing to leave the next morning, I could have sworn I saw a figure in the window of the main house, just standing there watching us load our car." Maria's testimony provided crucial corroboration for the prosecution's theory, but it also raised terrifying questions about how long this predatory behavior had been occurring. How many young women had felt unsafe in that apartment? How many had dismissed their fears because they couldn't prove anything concrete had happened? As night fell on the second day, Margaret faced another sleepless vigil. But this time, the silence was broken by a phone call that would test her sanity in ways she couldn't have imagined. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the same time as Emma's recorded audio, Margaret's phone rang. The number was blocked, but when she answered, she heard only breathing and background noise for several seconds. Then, barely audible beneath what sounded like traffic or machinery, came Emma's voice. "Mom! Mom, please help me!" The line went dead before Margaret could respond, leaving her screaming her daughter's name into the void of disconnected silence. The call was too brief to trace, but it confirmed Margaret's worst fears and greatest hopes simultaneously. Emma was alive, but she was somewhere that allowed her captor to make taunting contact with growing psychological sophistication. The FBI technical team worked through the remainder of the night analyzing the brief call, but the background noise was too distorted to identify specific locations. Still, they confirmed that the voice pattern matched Emma's speech characteristics, and the timing suggested her captor was deliberately orchestrating psychological warfare against the family. "This person wants you to suffer," Agent Wright explained. To Margaret and Robert, the timing, the messages, the brief call, it's all designed to maximize your emotional distress. But it also suggests Emma is alive and that the perpetrator has some connection to this area, some way of monitoring your reactions to their communications. As dawn broke over Queens on the third day, Margaret realized their nightmare was entering a new phase. This wasn't a simple abduction. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological terror directed not just at Emma, but at her entire family. Someone was watching them, studying their responses, feeding off their anguish. The investigation had expanded to include FBI behavioral analysts who were developing a profile of the perpetrator based on the escalating pattern of contact. But for Margaret, academic analysis felt distant and theoretical compared to the immediate reality of her daughter's voice calling for help in the darkness. The vacation that had begun with such hope and excitement had become a waking nightmare that seemed to grow more complex and terrifying with each passing hour. But Margaret held on to the one crucial fact that kept her sane. Emma's voice on that phone call had sounded weak and frightened, but it had sounded alive. Somewhere in the vast sprawl of New York City, her daughter was fighting to survive and hoping for rescue. The question was whether they could find her before the psychological game being played around her disappearance reached its intended conclusion, whatever that might be. The 9th day arrived gray and rainy, matching the suffocating despair that had settled over Margaret's world like a heavy blanket. 8 days of searches, interviews, media appearances, and false leads had produced no concrete progress in finding Emma. The FBI had expanded their investigation to include similar cases across the Northeast, but each new development seemed to lead to another dead end. Margaret had barely slept since Emma's disappearance, sustained only by coffee, determination, and the fragile hope that kept her functioning hour by hour. Robert had aged a decade in just over a week, his usual optimism replaced by a grim determination that frightened her almost as much as Emma's absence. They were staying in a hotel now, the Airbnb apartment sealed as an active crime scene. Margaret found herself standing at the window of their small room, staring toward Queens, trying to will herself to sense Emma's presence somewhere in the vast city below. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating, to be so close to the place where her daughter had vanished, yet still be no closer to understanding what had happened that terrible night. David Chen had been released after 48 hours of questioning. Despite the suspicious gaps in his alibi and the mounting testimony from former guests, investigators couldn't find physical evidence linking him to Emma's disappearance. His ride-sharing app data, while incomplete, was consistent with his claims about working that night. Security footage from nearby businesses showed his car in the area during some of the times in question, supporting at least part of his story. "We don't have enough to hold him," Detective Martinez had explained, her frustration evident, and the circumstantial evidence is compelling, but without physical proof or witness testimony placing him at the scene during the abduction, the DA won't file charges. The psychological torture had continued with clockwork precision. Every night at 3:17 a.m., Margaret's phone would ring. Sometimes she heard Emma's voice, brief and barely audible, calling for help or whispering, "Please find me." Other times, there was only breathing and background noise. The calls were too short to trace and came from different numbers each time, suggesting sophisticated technical knowledge or equipment. The FBI had installed monitoring equipment on Margaret's phone and stationed agents nearby during the nightly calls, but the perpetrator seemed to anticipate their every move. Agent Wright theorized they were dealing with someone who had significant technical expertise and was possibly monitoring police communications. This level of sophistication suggests either law enforcement experience or advanced technical training, he had told Margaret and Robert. The timing, the psychological manipulation, the ability to evade our tracing efforts, this isn't someone acting on impulse. The media attention had become a double-edged sword, while Emma's face was now known across the country, generating thousands of tips and potential sightings. The constant scrutiny had turned their tragedy into a public spectacle. Margaret could barely leave the hotel without being approached by reporters, amateur investigators, or well-meaning strangers who offered advice, theories, or simply wanted to share their own stories of loss. But it was the 10th day that brought the development that would change everything. Margaret was sitting in the hotel lobby, trying to eat breakfast she couldn't taste, when Detective Martinez appeared with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not hope exactly, but a grim urgency that suggested a significant breakthrough. "We need to get to the station immediately," she said quietly. "Something's arrived that you need to see." The police station buzzed with activity unlike anything Margaret had witnessed during the investigation. FBI technicians huddled around computer screens, officers moved with purposeful intensity, and Agent Wright met them at the entrance with an expression that mixed anticipation with deep concern. At 6:47 this morning, an email arrived at our investigation inbox, he explained as he led them toward a conference room. No return address, no identifying metadata that we can trace, but it contained a video file that appears to show Emma. Margaret's heart stopped. Is she... She couldn't finish the question. "She appears to be alive in the video," Agent Wright said carefully. "But Mrs. Jensen, I need to prepare you for what you're about to see. This is going to be extremely difficult." In the conference room, a large monitor displayed a frozen video frame showing a dark, grainy image. Agent Wright explained that the video was 47 seconds long and appeared to have been recorded recently based on technical analysis of the file. "We've enhanced the audio and lighting as much as possible," he said, his finger hovering over the play button. "Are you ready?" Margaret nodded, though she felt anything but ready. Robert took her hand as the video began to play. The screen showed a dimly lit room with concrete walls and what appeared to be a single overhead bulb providing minimal illumination. The space looked like a basement or underground storage area, with pipes visible along the ceiling and moisture stains on the walls. The camera angle was stationary, suggesting it had been set up specifically to record this message. And there, in the center of the frame, was Emma. Margaret's breath caught in her throat as she saw her daughter for the first time in 10 days. Emma was sitting on what looked like a small cot or bench, her clothes wrinkled, but apparently the same ones she'd been wearing when she disappeared. Her hair was disheveled, and she appeared thinner, but she was unmistakably alive. Emma looked directly into the camera and spoke in a voice that was recognizably hers, though strained with exhaustion and fear. "Please get me out of here. Please, I just want to come home." The words were spoken in English, clear and deliberate, as if she had been instructed on exactly what to say. She repeated the phrase twice more, each time with increasing desperation, before the video went dark. Margaret found herself sobbing with a mixture of relief and anguish. Relief that Emma was alive and appeared physically unharmed. Anguish at seeing her daughter's obvious terror and captivity. Robert wrapped his arms around her as she struggled to process what they'd just witnessed. "The video confirms that Emma is being held against her will," Agent Wright said gently. "But it also tells us several important things about her situation and her captor." FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Sarah Chen had joined them in the conference room and began explaining the significance of what they'd observed. First, the location appears to be underground, possibly a basement or sub-basement. The concrete construction and visible utilities suggest an older building, likely in an industrial or mixed-use area. Second, she continued, Emma's appearance and demeanor suggest she's been adequately fed and isn't being physically abused, at least not in ways that would be visible on camera. Her captor seems more focused on psychological control than physical violence. But most importantly, Dr. Chen said, the video itself represents a significant escalation. Sending visual proof of life suggests the perpetrator is building toward some kind of resolution, either a ransom demand or... She didn't finish the sentence, but Margaret understood the implication. Either someone wanted something in exchange for Emma's return, or they were preparing to dispose of evidence. Have there been any ransom demands? Robert asked. Any contact explaining what they want? Agent Wright shook his head. That's what's unusual about this case. Most abductions involve some kind of demand, money, political action, personal revenge. But we've received nothing beyond the psychological torment directed at your family. As the FBI technical team continued analyzing the video for clues about its origin and location, Margaret found herself replaying Emma's words over and over in her mind. Her daughter's voice had carried a strength that amazed her. Despite obvious fear and exhaustion, Emma had spoken clearly and directly, as if she was trying to communicate more than just her desperate plea for rescue. She looked directly at the camera, Margaret observed to Detective Martinez, like she was trying to tell us something specific. We're analyzing every frame for potential hidden messages or clues, Detective Martinez replied. Your daughter is intelligent and resourceful. If there was a way for her to communicate additional information, she might have found it. The video had been broadcast to law enforcement agencies across the region, and analysts were comparing the visible architecture and infrastructure to known buildings in the area. The concrete, construction, pipe configuration, and electrical installations might provide enough detail to narrow down possible locations. But as afternoon turned to evening, Margaret realized they were facing a cruel paradox. The video that proved Emma was alive also demonstrated how completely she had vanished from the world they knew. The room where her daughter was being held could be anywhere within hundreds of miles, and without additional clues, they were still searching for a needle in a haystack the size of the northeastern United States. The nightly phone call came at exactly 3:17 a.m., as it had every night since Emma's disappearance. But this time, instead of Emma's voice, Margaret heard the man who had been tormenting them, the same rough, disturbing voice from the original recording found on Emma's phone. Did you enjoy seeing her? The voice asked with obvious satisfaction. She's been asking about you constantly, wondering why you haven't found her yet, wondering if you're even trying. Margaret gripped the phone with white knuckles, her voice shaking with rage and desperation. Please, just tell us what you want. Money, anything, just don't hurt her. I don't want your money, the voice replied with chilling calmness. I want you to understand how easy it is to lose everything you love, how quickly safety becomes illusion. The line went dead, leaving Margaret staring at her phone in the darkness of their hotel room. The words echoed in her mind with the weight of a philosophical manifesto rather than a simple threat. This wasn't about ransom or revenge. It was about something deeper and more disturbing. Agent Wright had been monitoring the call from the adjacent room and appeared within minutes. Did he say anything that might indicate his location or intentions? Margaret repeated the conversation word for word, focusing on the perpetrator's apparent fascination with concepts of safety and loss rather than concrete demands. The psychological profile was becoming clearer, but it was also becoming more terrifying. He's not motivated by traditional criminal goals, Dr. Chen explained when she arrived to analyze the latest contact. This appears to be someone who derives satisfaction from demonstrating the arbitrary nature of security and happiness. Emma may have been chosen not for who she is, but for what she represents: innocent trust in the safety of family travel. The implications were chilling. If Emma had been selected randomly as a symbol rather than targeted specifically, then her captor's ultimate intentions might have nothing to do with her personal welfare. She was a prop in someone else's twisted demonstration about the fragility of normal life. As the 11th day dawned, Margaret faced the terrible realization that their nightmare might not have a happy ending. The video proved Emma was alive, but it also revealed the calculating sophistication of whoever was holding her. This wasn't a desperate criminal making mistakes. It was someone executing a careful plan with precision and psychological insight. But Margaret had made her own resolution during the sleepless hours after the phone call. She would not give her daughter's captor the satisfaction of watching their family disintegrate under pressure. Emma was alive, which meant hope was still possible. And as long as hope existed, Margaret would continue fighting with every resource, every ounce of strength, every connection she could make to bring her daughter home. The investigation had taken on new urgency with the arrival of the video, but it had also revealed the true scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just about finding Emma. It was about stopping someone who had turned kidnapping into a form of philosophical terrorism, using her daughter's life to make a point about the illusory nature of safety in modern life. But Margaret knew something her daughter's captor might not have anticipated. A mother's love is not an illusion. It's the most real and powerful force in the universe, and it would not be deterred by psychological games or philosophical manifestos. Emma was out there waiting for rescue, and Margaret would not rest until she brought her daughter home. The video had shown Emma looking directly into the camera with a strength that belied her terrifying circumstances. If her daughter could maintain hope and courage while being held captive, then Margaret could certainly do the same while working to free her. The real battle was just beginning, but now they knew their enemy and could see their goal. Emma was alive. That was everything. That was enough to keep fighting no matter what darkness lay ahead. 36 hours after the video arrived, the break they'd been praying for came from an unexpected source. A building inspector named Frank Morrison, who had seen Emma's story on the news, called the FBI tip line with information that would finally crack the case open. "I've been working on building code violations in Queens for 15 years, he told Agent Wright. "That basement in the video, I recognize those specific pipe configurations and electrical installations. There's only one building in my district with that exact setup." The building was a converted warehouse 8 blocks from the Airbnb where Emma had disappeared, close enough for her captor to monitor the family's activities and police response in real time. The structure had been partially renovated into artist studios and storage units, with several basement spaces that had been flagged for code violations but never fully investigated. The FBI surrounded the building within 2 hours of Morrison's call, coordinating with local SWAT teams and hostage negotiators. Margaret and Robert waited at a command post 3 blocks away, watching on monitors as tactical teams prepared to enter the building. At 4:23 p.m. on the 11th day since Emma's disappearance, agents breached the basement storage unit identified by the building inspector. They found Emma alone in a space that matched the video exactly. Concrete walls, overhead bulb, small cot. She was weak and dehydrated, but physically unharmed, conscious and able to walk with assistance. but her captor was gone. The space had been abandoned recently, with evidence suggesting he had fled within hours of sending the video. Emma told investigators that the man had left suddenly the previous night, telling her that the game was over and that someone would find her soon. Margaret reached Emma at the hospital an hour later, holding her daughter for the first time in 11 days, while both of them sobbed with relief and exhaustion. Emma was safe, alive, and coming home. The investigation into Emma's captor continued for months afterward. David Chen was eventually cleared of all suspicion when security footage from a Manhattan restaurant confirmed his alibi for the night of the abduction. The real perpetrator, identified through DNA evidence found in the basement storage unit, turned out to be Marcus Webb, a former building maintenance worker with access to multiple properties in the area and a history of mental illness that had gone untreated. Webb had been systematically targeting young female guests at short-term rental properties, using his technical knowledge to disable security systems and his familiarity with building layouts to commit abductions that seemed impossible. Emma had been his fourth victim, though the others had been released after shorter periods of captivity. Marcus Webb was never captured. He disappeared completely after abandoning Emma, leaving behind only evidence of a disturbed individual who had transformed his feelings of powerlessness into a campaign of terror against innocent families. The FBI believed he had left the region entirely, possibly continuing his pattern of predatory behavior in another part of the country. But for Margaret and Robert Jensen, the investigation's loose ends mattered less than the miracle of Emma's return. Their daughter survived not just physical captivity, but the psychological warfare directed at their entire family. The vacation that had begun with such hope and joy had become a testament to the power of love to endure even the most devastating trials. Emma recovered fully from her ordeal, though she would carry emotional scars that required ongoing counseling and support. The family returned to Springfield, Illinois, where they rebuilt their sense of safety and trust gradually, day by day. The story of Emma's disappearance and recovery became a symbol of hope for other families facing similar tragedies. Margaret often received calls from parents whose children had vanished, looking for guidance and encouragement from someone who had traveled through the darkness and emerged with their family intact. "Never give up," she would tell them. "No matter how hopeless it seems, no matter how much time passes, never stop believing that love is stronger than whatever evil took your child." Emma came home because we never stopped fighting for her, and because she never stopped fighting to come home to us. The Jensen family learned that safety is indeed sometimes an illusion, but they also discovered that love, hope, and determination are not illusions at all. They are the most real things in the world, powerful enough to bring light into the deepest darkness and to reunite families that refuse to be broken by fear. Emma Jensen came home. That's what mattered. That's what would always matter. And in a world where such stories don't always end with reunions, her return stood as proof that sometimes, just sometimes, love really is enough to overcome even the most calculated evil. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the agony of a mother's love and the triumph of never giving up hope, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced that terrible moment when safety becomes illusion? How do we protect the ones we love in a world that can be so unpredictable? Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because stories like Emma's remind us why we must never stop believing in the power of love to overcome darkness. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that miracles still happen, that families can survive the unthinkable, and that hope is never truly lost. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light, stories that honor the strength of families like the Jensens and the courage of survivors like Emma. Together, we create a community that refuses to let evil win, that celebrates every reunion, and that never stops fighting for those who are still missing. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for believing that love always finds a way.